Hi, I'm Dustin. I'm not one for formal introductions or a resume or list of bona fides. So instead, let's just jump into a vacation style presentation on Iceland, the land of fire, and well, lots of ice. With some beautiful landscapes and maybe a little sprinkling of actual geology thrown in for good measure. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the Mid-Atlantic Spreading Center, which Iceland happens to sit right atop. The Gelindalar eruption during the day, a little quick time lapse on nights in Iceland. We're going to go back to the volcano about a week and a half later when it's becoming more active and we have better contrast at night. Talk about getting around Iceland, some of the challenges. Well worth it though if you can rent a car and don't mind driving back roads hundreds of miles potentially from other people. The Blue Lagoon and the power station, which supplies 20,000 homes in Iceland with power, and the water for the lagoon itself, and some hydrogen as well. The Silfra snorkeling pond in Rift Valley, which is within the Pingvellir National Park. Lots of waterfalls and geysers and thermal vents. And then we're going to go back to the volcano theme and go look at some remnants of lava tubes, columnar basalts, stuff like that. And finally, we'll talk about the shrinking glaciers and the effect that that's having on tourism. Our journey begins here at the Los Angeles airport. We're going to be flying to JFK and then on to Reykjavik. Total flight time is about 12 hours, not including the layover. Well, I'll see you on the other side. We chose to travel to Iceland both due to the Geldalinar volcano, which has been erupting since March 19th, and due to the fact that they have had coronavirus restrictions lifted for all of those who have received a full vaccination. The only main road in Iceland is the Ring Road. It follows the coastline around the entire island. Beware that in Iceland the word road is very subjective. Many apparent marked highways are in reality gravel and dirt single-lane paths that are reminiscent of a rally racing stage rather than a major thoroughfare. Here's an example of a major road that's marked on the map. As you can see, it's single lane and things could get a little scary. Also, watch out. Snowstorms and rainstorms seem to appear out of nowhere. Also, stick to the main roads whenever possible. Icelanders have specifically built equipment for off-roading, and the rental car that you're going to get is not going to be up to snuff with these monsters. I've never seen tires this large in my entire life. It puts every bro-dozer in Oildale to shame. So prior to the actual eruption, they had seen an increase in seismicity in this area beginning in late 2019 all the way up into just before the eruption. And there had been warnings given that an eruption could come at any time. Okay, let's look at the larger tectonic picture of what's going on here near our volcano. So here we are over Iceland. You can see the Mid-Atlantic Spreading Center running all the way through. And notice this is the only place on it where we see any surface expression that gets above water level. Here we see it coming in from the south, trending up through the Reykjanes Peninsula and up through Iceland, making kind of a jog in a triple junction. Here's a simplified diagram of what's going on here at the spreading center. Again, note that it forks off here. We've got the North American plate moving this way, the Eurasian plate moving the other way, and all sorts of tectonics, earthquakes, volcanology, all kinds of stuff going right there in that new lithosphere. So let's take a look at what this looks like in a little more detailed scale. As we can see here, there's really a whole region where we have different active tectonics. We have different miniature spreading valleys. And here we can see what's going on below the surface, where we have thinning in the lithosphere, we have deep asthenospheric upwelling going on, and that's why we're getting all of this volcanism. So starting in early 2020, the equivalent of the USGS in Iceland started noting an increase in seismicity in the peninsula. In the 7 days prior to the eruption, they were able to issue a warning, as there were more than 40,000 recordable seismic events, some in which were up to magnitude 5. So non-trivial stuff here. Things were really rocking and rolling. This is the trail walk up. It's not particularly difficult, but it does give a decent incline as you get closer to the actual volcano itself. It's about an hour and 15 minutes in and about 45 minutes back out. This is a photo that was taken just as the fissure started to open up. There was a single opening that began to fill the valley with lava, and then over subsequent weeks there have been multiple vents with various levels of activity. However, the primary one that you'll see in all of the videos, known as vent system 1, is still the one that has the big classic cone that's built up and is contributing the most lava to the area. However, vents 3, 2, and 5 have also started to have some level of surface expression building up that cone, and they may take some of the volume of lava away from vent system 1, and they have started to increase in the volume of lava that's flowing out of them. Okay, so here's a diagram that shows that first vent and all the subsequent vents, and shows some of the development of the cinder cones that have already occurred as of April 14th. The energy of each of these seems to shift over time. At the time we were there, vent 1 was the primary eruption, and you could see a small bit of gas and other things escaping from vent 5. Okay, so there's a small raised sort of peninsula that you walk up as you get right up to the eruption, and you're surrounded on either side by the solidified lava flows, which, as you can see, you can walk right up to. One thing I didn't realize when I first saw this was that they're solidified at the top, but if you look at them from the side, you can actually see that there is a red hot magma layer that still flows underneath what's here. And even the surface all the way through is extremely hot, as you can see here as I pour some water onto it. While we were there were people roasting marshmallows, hot dogs, all sorts of things on top of it. Now, before I hear any complaints that this is 45 minutes of somebody walking to a volcano, let's just remember that we all spent the better part of 9 hours watching three hobbits do the same damn thing. Forgot my infrared thermometer, but in case you had any questions as to how hot this is, even at this surface skin that's solidified, here's a good test for you. Well, it's erupting at 1400 degrees, but here a quarter mile away, it's still hot enough to flash water to steam instantaneously. Okay, as we continue to walk up closer to the primary vent, we come to an area where the lava is actively flowing and actually expanding out into the valley. And here the noise and everything is really strong, and you see the surface solidifying instantaneously and then being immediately broken up and pushed onto new ground as this thing progresses outward. So you can hear the unique glass breaking sound. It gets pretty darn loud when you're up close. Okay, so here's the main event, so to speak, is you crest over a little bit of a blind hill. You come face to face with the volcano here. We visited this about 7 a.m. on May 8th, and then again from around 11 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. on the 22nd. So we'll start with the May 8th videos. Okay, here's the obligatory selfie with the volcano shot for all the young people for the Insta face grams and TikToks and whatever the hell the kids do these days. You actually can hear the volcano in the distance, even from hundreds of yards away. You hear it roaring from the other side of the mountain. Another interesting thing to note is when there were higher eruptions going off throughout the day, you could see them from anywhere in the valley. In fact, you could see them right from the airport terminal. So while we were sitting watching the minor eruptions, here you can see the secondary vent putting out a little bit of smoke there to the left, and then this popped up, which appears to be a dust devil if you live in the desert, but brought in by some sort of convective forces going on here with the lava itself. In fact, in some of this you actually see it go out onto the lava and actually pick pieces up and throw them around. Didn't catch it all on video, but there were some cases where stuff was getting thrown, red hot lava pieces 20-30 feet into the air. So this of course would be the optimal time in these terrible weather conditions to try to throw up a drone. So you only live once, so let's go ahead and do that. I've got to say, this video doesn't do this thing justice. As you walk over and crest the hill behind this thing, the heat and sound is just intense. You're going from a 30-degree day to it being 130 or 40 outside. So here's where we're seeing the majority of the lava filling out this little valley here on top of the hillside. In fact, this is the arm that kind of fingered out and later
in the week they decided to build a earthen berm around everything, and it held for a couple of days, and then actually the rock got melted right through, and there was a brief time where you could actually see lava cascading like a waterfall down the hillside, which was pretty impressive. I believe they intend to set up yet another berm to try to keep all the lava here and off of all the main roads throughout the area. Okay, here's our approach to try to come right up to the cone itself. I was having a little bit of issues with the E-drafts and a few hiccups with the gimbal on the drone, just because these are far from ideal flight conditions with the winds that we're seeing, the weird dust devils, and of course the immense heat. I'm really surprised that drone made it through this entire trip. Kind of assumed this would be a sacrificial lamb sort of situation, but it held up fine. And this is the least expensive drone that I own. So this shows that not only are these things affordable and relatively easy to fly, you can actually do some pretty impressive things with them. I actually use what equates to about a $400 drone you can buy at Walmart to do orthomosaics, mapping with some digital elevation models that are coming out of it, and a lot of stuff that you would never think would be possible at this price point. Okay, while this footage was undoubtedly impressive, I think it'd be much cooler to see it with a greater contrast at night. The only problem is during the spring and parts of summer in Iceland, it's really only quote unquote dark about 3 hours a night, and even then it never gets truly dark. You can still go outside and go to the bar if you want at 2 o'clock in the morning and still be able to stumble home safely. So while we're watching this time lapse of it getting dark from the hotel room, let's take a look at doing some homework and what's actually going on here geologically. Let's remember that this is a shield volcano, meaning it has a broad, sort of wide shape. And that's dictated primarily by the viscosity of the magma itself. Depending on the viscosity, which of course is the resistance to flow, you can have violent eruptions with ejecta going thousands of feet in the air. You can have everything down to just minor leakages through fissures, or you can have here where you have primarily low energy eruptions, but you do get the building of a little bit of a cinder cone and some mild eruptions that are actually ideal conditions because scientists can actually get up onto these, whereas with the more what we think of as violent eruptions, you're not able to get close just due to safety concerns. So here's a classic pictorial of a shield volcano. Notice we do have our small fountain. There actually is a bit of a gas cloud. They're talking about having increased sulfur dioxide levels that are kind of falling in as a haze over Reykjavik. And you actually are getting a bit of tephra ejection. We walked around picking up pieces of volcanic glass or tephra within about 400 or 500 yards of the volcano itself, but we did see some all the way out in the parking lot, so it is getting ejected at least a mile. We see two distinct lava flows kind of fingering out away from the volcano. We're seeing these flow fields where it's damming up against the topography, and potentially, as we're not very far from the beach, we may actually see these ocean entries where we get these quote unquote littoral explosions, and I think pillow basalts and all kinds of stuff there. There is evidence that there was a lava tube forming underneath the flow. It actually collapsed, and that's part of what they think happened with the secondary containment that failed, is that there was a lava tube forming underneath it, and it actually partially, the ceiling collapsed, and they actually saw relief caused there, and then it started cascading down the mountain. Okay, so here we are back at the volcano on the 22nd at around 1 a.m. But before we get too far into the really cool clip here, let's continue on our geology lesson a little bit. Typically speaking, when you're in a spreading center like we have here between the North American and Eurasian plates, you get new lithosphere being created, but you typically don't get any landmass that builds above sea level. Iceland's a really unique case. In fact, the case is named after it in what they call the Icelandic hotspot, where you're having both a spreading region and you're directly below a mantle plume, which in fact they call the Icelandic mantle plume, where you're having spreading and volcanism and everything associated with that coming near the surface, and then it's magnified by the fact that you're sitting on top of this hot spot where you're getting deep welling from within the asthenosphere, causing a unique combination of conditions where you're actually able to build out significant topographic relief above sea level.
So just up the road from the volcano, in fact, you can see it from the volcano, is Iceland's largest geothermal plant. It was built in 1976, and it supplies the entire southwestern region with power. It supplies 21,000 houses with electrical and hot water for heating. There aren't many electric heaters in homes or businesses. Hot water is actually piped into town, and everything's done with big radiators either in the floor or in the walls. As a result of this, power is ridiculously cheap, on the order of 11 cents a kilowatt, and hot water is essentially free, which is why nearly every home, hotel, resort, anything you can think of usually has some kind of hot tub associated with it. From the highway, this one can be a little confusing. There are signs for a high-end hoity-toity resort and for an industrial power plant, and both are next to each other and are intertwined. The effluent water, wastewater from the power plant is sent over to the fancy lagoon where people bathe in it. It has a really high silica content and has all sorts of supposed healing properties. There's a white clay that basically only occurs here. Hydrogen car fueling stations have started to appear in parts of Iceland, and the hydrogen is generated by the excess power coming out of the power plant during off-peak hours. There's an electrolysis plant that actually takes some of the effluent water, applies an electrical current, and generates hydrogen that they can then compress and use as a vehicle fuel. Iceland has been expanding its geothermal power generation as they have been phasing out gasoline-powered cars. They are up to 45% of all new vehicle registrations being of EVs, with an intent to go to nearly 100% in the next decade. Even these small cabins are tied into this hot water system, and as you can see, all of them even have hot tubs. Okay, let's continue on. This is another interesting stop. This is the Silfra snorkeling pond. This is billed as the only place in the world where you can readily snorkel between two tectonic plates. There's a fissure between the two. That would be the North American and Eurasian plate. And for about $80, they will put you in a dry suit and you can go down this big fissure. The outside temperature was about 33, 34 degrees this morning. So this deeper portion here with the sheer walls is called the cathedral. You continue along the fissure here, which eventually opens into a shallow lagoon. Okay, so here we are at the Silfra snorkeling pond again, with that fissure that we went down in, and then that one that we flew the drone over. So here's a little context of what we're looking at on Google Earth. And then here's a pictorial of the area explaining what's going on. So we're looking at a continental rift valley that's formed here. Notice it actually matches the standard diagram for these pretty close. We've got the North American and Eurasian plates pulling apart from one another, and we have this valley that has these down-thrown blocks. And we have all of these great big huge fissures at the surface running along the valley, which are pretty impressive to look at. And of course the fissures extend down below water level in the little pond in the bay there. So what's not readily apparent when you look at these, of course, is that these quote-unquote fissures, as people were calling them locally, are actually the exposed footwall block due to the normal faulting that's occurring here. And we're going to continue on here a little further off the beaten path. Note that the weather does change quickly. The sky's relatively clear, and here it is snowing on us just a few minutes later. Okay, I'm going to combine a few examples here. Iceland is the land of fire and ice, and in addition to that, there's a whole lot of waterfalls, caves, cliffs, stuff like that that I'll just sprinkle in here a little bit. Here's a map of just the most prolific waterfalls. In fact, there are thousands within the country. Ooh, that was a close one. So yeah, I must contend that Iceland probably has the highest concentrations per square mile of waterfalls. Notice this one has some cool columnar basalts going on. Those are also very common here at a lot of stops. Got that J.J. Abrams natural lens flare going on here. So we'll just run through a couple of these. I'm not going to say much. So 95% of Iceland's municipal water supply actually comes from boreholes and other means and is completely unfiltered. They don't put chlorine in their water. Everything is just produced and immediately put in for municipal use. No filtering or processing is required. Rural homes either pull their water from one of these surface running water supplies or drill shallow wells for their sources. In some areas, the water has a bit of a sulfur smell to it. For the most part, the TDS is really low. However, there were a few places that had mineral water. In fact, here's an example of a farm that allowed people to come right up and sample their own mineral water right there from their shallow wells. Now here's an example that shows a mineral spring out here in the middle of nowhere that a farmer lets tourists use. You can see on the right that the drinking water that is found in most of the country has very low total dissolved solids. But here you can see you've got some water that has quite a bit of calcium, a little sodium, magnesium, and iron, and a lot of CO2 and HCO3, given a lightly carbonated effect and an alkaline pH similar to what you'd pay a fortune for at your local whole paycheck, aka Whole Foods. And here you can just drive right up, open the tap,
Fill up your water bottle. Here you can see some of that CO2 bubbling through and some discoloration from the iron and other dissolved solids. Let's take ourselves a little sample here. Oh boy, that is refreshing. Okay, get back to looking at just how widespread the geothermal and volcanic area is through here. This map shows all of the areas which have strong recent volcanism. Although, again, you run into geothermal hot springs and areas where they've drilled real shallow to harness geothermal energy throughout the island. Here we are at the Stroker Geyser and Hot Springs, which erupts again about every 8 to 12 minutes, kind of like Old Faithful. Further up the hill, we have these vents that are going off constantly with steam flashing off and coming to the surface. You can see all of the sulfur buildup around it. And of course, it smells like sulfur. Okay, now we're going to head to the Vachlanir Cave. This is actually a lava tube that subsided on one side, causing the supply of lava to be cut off, and the rest of the lava was able to drain out. So we're left with this big open 4-chambered subterranean cave. And I'm going to go ahead and let our tour guide take over for the duration of this.
Well, we are standing here. This staircase here is 7.5 meters. We start going down here. This is the surface tube over there, where the farmers pick up the water. We go down here, we'll go into this chamber here, to that direction. After a few minutes there, we will go through the breakdown. This is the breakdown of the cave. And we will go towards the parking area, not all the way. We have another staircase which is 12 meters deep. Go down that one and a little bit east from there. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Or as I look at it, 1, 2, and 3 caves. Okay. You can turn your lights on, follow me. Alright.
Would be 1, maybe like 1, 2, 3 flow. The tube would flow over.
Mm-hmm.
These lava tubes are present throughout Iceland and are often found when somebody falls through into one.
Well, if it wasn't for this opening, no one have knew about this cave. And it was 8,000 years ago when this opened up. When we started this process, 2009, the National Park and the volunteers around here, there was a mountain of mud. There was about 80 tons of mud which was hand picked up, lifted up in this container.
So here our host just describes that they cleaned all this out and we moved down to our next point of interest. It's interesting to note that the volcano that's going on now actually has some of these lava tubes that have been identified, and one actually collapsed and was a conduit for lava that actually went and undermined the berm of secondary containment, allowed lava to spill out below where they had actually cordoned things off just a couple of days into our trip.
and side here, and I'm going a little further. Don't come closer. No, stay further out, please. I will explain later why. Wait for everyone to come to this side, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about this lava forming the cave, forming of the cave. As you can see, this is a big chamber we are in, and this is, we can say, the highest part of this cave. And up there are the craters to that direction. One of the river, just one, then flowing from there all the way down, forming this cave. But as you can see now, this is closed. And the reason for that is the heat in here. The heat was over 1000 degrees centigrade. And the ceiling of the cave couldn't stand the heat and sank towards the floor, closed the tube. Most of the lava empties out, except this lava lake. And you see the light gray level goes up to 3 meters. That's the last lava in here. There might still be cave a few meters away. It might have collapsed all the way. We don't know. There's no entrance. But underneath here is another cave. And that's the reason I don't want you all to come here. Because if I fell through, I don't want you to fall. It might hurt for me. But this is more or less like a cheese. We have this big cave here. We have one underneath. There's most likely another cave or the same cave going up there. And there might be caves to the side as well. And this, this looks like we have a lot of caves around. And it definitely is. If you are hiking around in the lava field, you have to be extra careful. You might be the lucky one finding a new cave, but I'm not sure if you can tell anyone about it. You know, I found the cave, lost. And through the centuries, I would say through the decades, it may be through the centuries, we have lost people in Iceland never found in lava field like this one. And when we have been searching around here for the caves, checking for new caves and so on, we sometimes can see a little blue sky, a little hole on the ceiling. So that means that you can go the other way. You can go from there and down, of course. Gravity. After everything stopped, this lava flowing or the eruption, this starts cooling down. You know how long time it takes to cool down? Anyone?
Hundreds of years.
This one, no. This one can take up to 100 years. It's probably 70 to 100 years, like a lava field like this. 2014, there was an eruption in 300 kilometers east from here, in the middle of Iceland. It lasted for 6 months. It's going to take that one at least 200 years, 2 centuries, because of the thickness and the size of it. It was a huge one. And what is going on now, we never know. We don't know how it ends, how it builds up. It will probably be quite a big one.
So here we are at the Glacial Lagoon. This is another really popular stop for tourists. Big chunks of the glacier fall off and end up trapped in this bay, and they float around and they're nearly translucent, which is really cool. Eventually they get pulled out with the tide and then pushed out onto the beach. So you have a situation where you have a perfectly black basaltic beach with these clear chunks of ice. Some days they're a few inches long, some days they're large boulder size, and that's why it has the name the Black Diamond Beach. Now, one thing we did make sure to do is break off a piece of one of these pieces of glacial ice and use it to create some mixed drinks along with some authentic Icelandic vodka. And I know what they say at the Coors Brewing Company about the
Colorado Rockies, but I think Icelandic glacial melt makes a smoother beverage. I don't always drink basalt filtered Icelandic vodka when it's 31 degrees at 8 in the morning. But when I do, I prefer that it be chilled only by the freshest of glacial ice. Stay thirsty, my friends. Now, unfortunately, after seeing what I think is the most beautiful part of Iceland, the glacial lagoon and Diamond Beach, we have to get into the depressing bit. Anthropogenic climate change has caused these glaciers to recede at a increased rate since the 19th century, which has affected not only the environment but also travel and tourism throughout the area. Ski resorts are open fewer and fewer months of the year. I talked to several locals that were concerned that the season in which they're able to do glacial tours and other things related to the glaciers has been reduced significantly, and their revenue has reduced accordingly. So just kind of a somber thing to go out on, but remember that there are parts of the world that are going to suffer much stronger and poignant direct effects of climate change. Luckily, Iceland is a first world country and can afford to do a lot of mitigation. This is not going to be true of some of the more economically challenged parts of the world.
And that's all I've got for this presentation. Thank you for your time. I'll go ahead and fade out here with a video showing what the eruption looked like as of this morning. I borrowed this one, of course. We can see that the morphology has changed with this quite a bit. Now this stuff is just sort of running down a hill rather than erupting. And the bridge that you could walk across that would let you get right up onto the volcano has been swallowed too. So people may not be able to get as close as we were to this thing ever again.